Let's first talk about Carbine 1. Carbine 1 is right now somewhere between 12 to 1,500 rounds as a count. When ammo gets back up there, normally it's about a 2,000 round class. Why is it that much? It's because you need time behind the gun. It's because we can talk about things or we can just go do them. So what I learned in the skydiving community is we can talk about jumps all day long, but the only way I got better was getting up in a bird and getting out, and then of course working on my body flying, and of course my landings and my patterns and everything else involved in that canopy control stuff as well. Never once on the ground did I get better. I had to go out there and do it. So for us, that foundation is very, very important, and that's where our time is spent. We start off in the morning running and working a 50-yard zero on our guns. Most of the time, the average student shows up and shoots a group about 5 inches, and we're trying to shoot about a half inch or less in a perfect situation at 50 yards on a 6-inch bullseye. And the reason why is because later on in the course, as we're getting better and more proficient, we're going to be shooting that same 6-inch bullseye, but not from a bagged or from a rest position, but from a standing position, because then we've got to work on 75 to 100 yards for sitting and kneeling supported. Whenever we're finding ourselves in a prone position, that's primarily what we're looking at as 100 yards and out. Doesn't mean we can't do it closer, but when I have ranges that allot for that, that's really the testament of what this rifle can do. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time doing that up close and personal work, 25 and in. Shit, at that point, it's called a handgun course. Yes, we do need to do those drills, but the rifle, the benefit to the rifle is that I can reach out with the average AR and get a hit on somebody at 500 yards. If I know what I'm doing fundamentally. When we're in Wyoming, we're shooting 12-inch wide to 23-inch tall, and of course that includes that little bit of head, so you're kind of missing some of that steel by Steel Ops. And the reality is that when you get out there, a lot of people aren't used to shooting that far because most of the ranges don't permit it. Well, that's okay. When you're out on a range with me, our goal is to show you what that gun can do, especially at distance. I don't want a close proximity gunfight unless I can control it. I don't want that to happen at all. I want it further away from me. I want to change somebody's mind and body posture and behavior at distance, because that means they have to be really good in order to get me. So that's why we're there to develop those skills. When we're in class, we're going to be working on a lot of those techniques. We're going to be working on speed reloads, tack reloads, malfunction clearances. How do we get the gun back up and running when a problem occurs? We're going to be talking about transitional work. We're going to be doing supine, which is on your back. We're going to be doing urban prone, which is on your side, so that whatever situation that you may face, you've at least been there before, meaning you're not writing the how to do it manual as you're doing it. How should you shoot the classes? Well, I would try to shoot it as realistically as possible. I mean, the average civilian is going to be faced with one of a couple scenarios. One, it's rioting, looting, things going on in the neighborhood, bad things are happening, and you have time to get your plate carrier on and your war belt, and you totally, quote unquote, kid up. Yeah, you should shoot a part of the class like that. However, what I would recommend is that's after you're proficient with running a gun, because anytime you start to add gear and other things to your body, if you already don't know how to run a gun, it's only going to complicate things. First, you need to develop your style. After that, you add those little complexities and nuances after that. Getting into guns and gear, that's really important as well. Most people bring ARs to class. Can you bring other styles of weapons? Some people like to shoot the class part of it with PCCs, that's pistol caliber carbines. So some people run part of the drills, especially if there's a little bit of an ammo shortage, with just like a 9mm carbine. That's totally acceptable. You can run an AK in the class if you want. Where you got to be careful is if you show up with an AK and you don't bring a backup, because I can tell you that in a class, in a standard rifle class, everybody shows up with 2 to 3 extra rifles. that's not going to be a hard problem trying to get you another rifle if you end up having an issue with your rifle. But if you're running an AK, very rarely does somebody else have an AK in class that they can loan you. So again, we need to think about that. If you're running something like 300 Blackout, I would bring 2. I would bring 3 if it was me, but if you only had 2, then 1 is none, 2 is 1, right? So if you have a problem, chances are there's not somebody else in the class that has 300 Blackout, and you're sitting there with a lot of good ammunition that you can't put in any other style of guns. So you can bring different styles of weapons, but some of the things you need to make some considerations for. Since we're training for 3 days, generally I spend probably 2 solid days with just a magazine in my back pocket. Why? Because that's realistic for me. I mean, I'm probably unzipping my bag, grabbing my rifle, which already has 1 mag in it. My spare mag's right next to it, so I'll grab that, throw it in my back pocket. So I'm gonna start doing speed reloads and other techniques as realistic as my lifestyle is going to kind of allow for it. What I mean by that is this: if all of a sudden something bad happens and you got to reach in and grab your AR, do you really have time to put on your war belt, all these other pouches that are on you? Probably not. So why are you learning to draw from those things if you are probably not going to spend a majority of your scenario facing a situation like that? Do you still need to know how to draw from those pouches and your chest rig and your commando harnesses? Absolutely. But I mean, don't show up on day 1 looking like Ninja Force 5 with all this stuff on. You don't know how to shoot your gun. You don't know how to operate your gun. And then all this other stuff is just complexity. And the likelihood of you using it is in a very extreme circumstance, when the likelihood of you just grabbing your gun and throwing a mag in your back pocket is pretty high. It would be the equivalent of carrying a mag on your side or 1 in your pocket. A lot of people just drop 1 in your pocket. So if you're going to take a class, you would just start drawing your spare mag from your pocket, not from a belt that looks like you're running an IPSC rig and you're showing up to a competition or a 3-gun match. That's not going to help you. You're not going to have to deal with the anomalies of today you wore a different style of pants and you're having a harder time getting that mag out of your pocket. So again, try to be as realistic as possible. 2 is based on the fact that you already know how to shoot. So we don't spend time going back to learning how to shoot. So some people that show up who've taken a quick class and gotten that next degree of belt, so to speak, all of a sudden are way out of their league when they show up to at least my Carbine II class. We are now focusing on speed and accuracy, just like we are in Carbine 1, but with the offset of shoot, move, communicate, working with others. Our transitional work is a lot more focused on here. There's a lot more onus on that, whereas in Carbine 1, we kind of end on the transition. And the transition is where we go from a rifle to a handgun. Our focus on the Carbine 1 class is carbine at that point. Whereas we get into a little bit of a dangerous spot when we start to focus on Carbine 2, because now we're doing a lot of pistol work in conjunction with the rifle. And some people, unfortunately, don't shoot the pistol that well. Remember, there's always a difference between pistol and carbine. Give me a good rifle shooter, that doesn't make a good pistol shooter. Generally, a good pistol shooter will be a good rifle shooter, and the reason why is on a rifle, it's shoulder fired, so we have a contact point. We also, when we're dealing with the rifle, we have a, call it 7-pound gun by the time you're dealing with all the accessories most of you guys throw on it, with a 5-pound stock military style trigger. But most of you do what I do, which is let's go get a Geisley 3.5-pound trigger, which means that the gun outweighs the trigger pull and it's being fired off the shoulder. Well, when we shoot a handgun, we're dealing with a 1.5-pound gun, if we're most of us are running Glock in the boxes or some form of striker fired pistol with a 5-pound trigger. So the trigger pull outweighs the weight of the gun. Even if you go to a 3.5-pound ghost connector, you're still, the trigger pull outweighs the weight of the gun. And a lot of us move and screw up the trigger pull when we're trying to press that shot off. Carbine II starts to graduate us from just worrying about ourselves and now starting to worry about other people. Our surroundings become bigger than us. Our communication is very important. Our situational awareness of, do I know how to take care of myself and my own equipment and run my gun and get it to where it needs to be? And am I being somewhat socially aware of what's going on with my partner? And if I need to, I can help them out as we are starting to move from one position to another position. So what you start to find in Carbine II is the throttle goes down, and we are now hammered down. Shoot, move, communicate is our focus of that particular class. And we're also doing some shoulder switches and shooting again from some unorthodox shooting position. One of the things that I like about the handgun course, Handgun 1, is that the handgun is our primary. Majority of the time, that's what you have on you. And if something happens, chances are that's what you're going to use to defend yourself. The foundation of that class, we start off at 25 yards working a 6-inch bullseye, trying to get them all in a black. Obviously a struggle on day one. When we get done with those drills, we start up close and we start working on the thing that generally causes the biggest issue for most students, and that is the trigger. Most people know how to aim the gun. Usually about 600 students come through the courses in a year, and I might have a handful that don't know how to utilize sights properly, and within generally 30 seconds to less than a minute of conversation, they know how to fix that. The trigger is the arch nemesis, not only for students, but even for myself. Usually if I blow a shot, it's related to me breaking the trigger incorrectly. So a lot of time and a lot of the fundamental work is mastering that trigger and knowing what we can get away with and when. We will also get into the draw, we get into speed reload and tack reload, and we get into all the positions that we may find ourselves in, whether we choose those positions or whether we get put there. So that's going to include supine, urban prone being on our side, and of course straight prone as well. How do we make this work? How do we solve that particular problem? I really enjoy this class. It's very realistic. We also get into one-handed shooting as well in the event that you are injured or in the event that you have to move with any type or anything that you would consider precious cargo. Generally for us, that's our family, our children, things of that nature. So very, very important how to mitigate against that. At the very end of class, we start getting into the movement piece of it, and we start getting into moving with another person. And that's generally where the class ends. Overall, good fundamentals. How do we get a bullet from point A to point B? How do we maintain our accuracy under speed? And those two go hand in hand. They're very, very important. That's the focus of Handgun 1. Handgun 2. Well, it might get into a little more of the sexy side, so to speak, when we say the word, it's about fighting. It's exactly that. We are now figuring out, how do I fight with this gun? How do I do it in a manner, because we're not going to go back in time and work on fundamentals. You should already know how to hit the target, but we're going to work on all the malfunctions again, like we did in Handgun 1, but we're going to start doing it with one hand, both our right hand and our left hand. Some say our strong and our support. I call it weapon hand, reaction hand for combative reasons, but nevertheless, we're all achieving the same thing. How do we fight in that particular class. And then we get into that shoot, move, communicate piece again. How do we start doing this faster? How do we start engaging multiple targets? How do we start training our eyes to see certain things, which we've already learned in Handgun 1, but now we're really, again, focusing hardcore on Handgun 2. Very, very important class. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress because of the techniques that I'm asking you to perform. And it's not one of those classes that we rush in. It's one of those classes that you take your time, you do the objective the way you need to do, and you don't try to catch up or race somebody else in those particular classes. When we start getting into the injury side of the house, I've had guys that have prosthetic legs, arms, suffering from different illnesses, so to speak, that causes some arms to not work or function the way they need to. Wheelchairs as well. The only thing that I'll say on the wheelchair side of the house is you're going to need to contact us because we need a good range that you can actually roll around on. Some ranges are a little sandier and you might get bogged down, but we teach everybody. I can, within the scope of the class, have you doing different drills than other students based on the fact that maybe you've got neck injuries and you can't do straight prone. Not a problem. Well, you're not going to be sitting on the bench. You're going to be shooting because that's the only way we're going to get better. Some guys, they can do a few up and down drills, but they can't do it all day long because their back or their knees or whatever is just not going to hold up. That's okay. The focus, again, is to get you time behind the gun, work on the techniques that are going to best fit you and your lifestyle. There are a lot of great vehicle courses that are out on the market, and they do offer a little bit different variety. What do I mean by that? Well, handgun has been taught for many years. Carbine's been taught for many years. So aside from our mojo as instructors, as teachers, there's not going to be a huge difference in what information you're getting. The vehicle side of the house, I believe, is one of those where you should, again, no matter what classes you're going to, go see other instructors. The vehicle is important because, at least I can say for my class, we're focusing on the chaos in the car and then get out of the car. I know this, if a gunman comes up to my window, I can't bail out the other side of the car over my wife and not address this particular threat right here. I'm going to have to deal with this in order to start getting out of the car at a later date. But I do need to get out of the car, and it needs to be in a hurry because I am trapped inside the car. There's a chaos that happens, I believe, inside the car when guys don't know what they're doing, especially when we're dealing with our significant others and our children as well. How do we negotiate that? What do we do if we're 4 cops and we're at a seminar and we're going to go down to Subway and go grab something to eat and something bad happens? You would think that 4 guys in a car with guns is a good thing. Sometimes it's not if they don't know what they're doing. So the majority of the class is spent negotiating 2-man pistol inside the car, 2-man rifle inside the car, because nowadays I don't know what situation you're going to find yourselves in. I mean, you look at the amount of shootings that have taken place with a rifle, and there's a high probability I get a rifle if I'm blowing through Seattle or Portland right now at my feet ready to go. So of course laws are going to dictate whether you're allowed to do that or not, but again, where we sometimes are, oh, that'll never happen. Well, the world's been changing pretty fast, so bottom line is you need to be changing with it. We also work on 4-man pistol, 4-man rifle, and of course we orientate the cars in all 4 directions when we're dealing with the vehicle. We talk about proper use of cover and concealment outside the vehicle, so we don't spend all our time inside the vehicle. We eventually got to get out and get back on the gun, and we got to know what hazards exist with that. The vehicle course is very important, and the reason why it's very important is because you guys spend a tremendous amount of time in the vehicle. If you're law enforcement, you spend pretty much the majority of your career in the vehicle. If you're civilians, however long the length of that drive is to get you to and from work, that's 1. 2, kids' games, soccer practices, going to the grocery store, all those things as well. So they start to stack up and you start to ask yourself, do I know how to handle things inside the car if something happens? And that's what vehicle does for us. The last part of vehicle that we try to end on is that worst case scenario. An example of that would be, I'm gonna go get my oil changed in my truck. My wife is gonna follow me in our other vehicle. She's gonna drop me off, and we're gonna go get lunch while it takes an hour and a half for them to do that. So I jump in the passenger seat. We pull up to a traffic light, or we pull off on a certain portion of road, and all of a sudden a gunman comes up to her side. Tractor trailer's parked in front of us. We're not gonna move that vehicle. Now, this is a situation that I have to deal with. Do we know how to negotiate that? And that is how we generally end the vehicle course, which is, one, what do you do if that person's injured? Two, how do we negotiate that when we're talking about our family members or in a law enforcement realm? That could be me on my computer doing a report right now, and my FTO all of a sudden sees a threat. He has no time to bail out of the car in order to deal with that. He immediately has to negotiate around me to engage that threat. So there's a lot of stuff that we may not like the answers to, but we need exposure to it, okay? And an understanding of options, and that's all that is. It's exposure to, hey, here's some ways to solve this particular problem, and if you did have time to open up the door, shoot the guy over the top of the car, awesome. But what if you don't? And that's where I have an issue, which is we have to have an answer for when things go wrong.